talk a lot about myself, but,
Well, I'd like to.
Well, we'd like to
what
hear that.
I'm gonna talk about is, the role of nuclear weapons and the influence it's had on history. And, I was, been to various tests and been in squadrons with nuclear weapons and everything, so that's what I'm gonna dwell on. In 1955, I went through the Air Force cadet program, and I went through the navigation portion where I came out a navigator and a second. And the other problem was we weren't getting much business. I was stationed in Michigan, and people weren't crashing too much. So our squadron got tasked to go to the Marshall Islands for the air support of, it was called Project Red Wing, which was a Task Force 7. The Army, the Navy, and the Air Force were 3 parts of the task force. The other 4 were organizations of the Atomic Energy Association. The whole purpose of the test was to test the 2nd generation nuclear devices. The yield of the newer weapons were much more than the early ones at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So,
Can you repeat that again, what you just said?
I said the purpose of the testing in the Marshall Islands was for a 2nd generation of nuclear weapons. The first ones were obviously killer weapons, but they didn't have the potency that the 2nd generation had. They had to test them. And the test area, did anybody see the movie Oppenheimer?
Yes.
Do you remember the scene where after the first, they call them shots. Whenever you test a nuclear weapon, it's a shot. And they said after the first shot, the announcer said, well, we're gonna have to move back on the 2nd shot. So that kind of right there, they had tested their weapons in the United States. But with the 2nd generation, they had to move out to the Pacific Ocean because it just wasn't safe to do it in the States. The test was called Red Wing and was consisted of 17 various nuclear explosions from tactical small units to the megaton, which is a megaton is the equivalent of 1 million tons of TNT. And so if you start building weapons with 8 or 9 megatons, that's a bunch. So that was the purpose of that. And our job in air rescue was just there were a lot of aircraft that would fly through the cloud, and our job was to be available, and we called it, being available was flying around in a circle during the shot. And we call it duck buck. And so you had to go with your duck buck, this airplane was flying around, and if any of the aircraft had problems with the nuclear drop, then we were there to go get them. We could land in the water, but it wasn't too rough. There were 17 tests of varying yields. I think the largest one was about 7 megatons. But they had one airdrop, and that was dropped from a B-52 bomber. The weapon was the 3.8 megaton unit, and it was 3.5 feet in diameter and 11 feet long. And we only fit in a B-52, if you're familiar with B-52s. They're a big 8-engine jet. And during the one test when they had the airdrop, there were one of the airplanes that was supposed to fly through the cloud developed some kind of problem, and we were flying the duck butt, and I was a navigator, and I had the communications, and I heard this Mayday call.
Oh, you did?
Mayday. Well, what happened? He called in, and this is what he said. He said, "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. My right engine's been struck by lightning." And he declared emergency, and it wasn't 10 seconds later, he said, "I've lost my left engine. We're bailing out." Now, the B-57 is a British design bomber called a Canberra, and I don't know why the U.S. Under license built them, but they're a small tactical bomber. They're not like a B-52 or anything. They only had 2 crew members, a pilot and a navigator. And this particular guy that had the Mayday, he was the pilot. But in the back seat, he had a scientist that was taking readings, observations of the nuclear blast. And short story is they bailed out, and the ground control had their position and relayed it to me, who was a navigator in the SA-16, and we went over to the crash site. And it was still dark, so we just orbited, or did the duck butt around where this position was. And they had the shot went off without any other problems, but it was when the dawn came. The shot was at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was still dark, so we had to wait till daylight to do our search for the pilot. And when daylight came, we went to the coordinates, and there he was. He was in a rifle raft, and we flew over him at about 50 feet, and he was waving his hands.
Oh, wow.
And we couldn't land because of the swells that were too big, so I got on the radio, and we got a hold of the destroyer and gave him the coordinates, and they picked him up, and he was okay. But the scientist that was in the back, there's no sign of him. We set up a search pattern, and that went on for 2 weeks. We flew missions to try to find the scientist, and never did. So he was declared dead, and the search was over. And all the 17 shots, that they went without a hitch, and we would have fly our duck butt, but never had another emergency like that. But since we had float planes, we had an alternative duty. We had to fly to the different islands. They had weathermen stationed at various islands. Marshall Islands is made up of 1,000 islands, and they weren't all occupied, but they set up weather stations on key islands to give reports to the headquarters. So, I mean, you had the right winds and everything to keep from getting nuclear contamination. And one thing I forgot to tell you about on that airborne shot, the Navigator Bombardier missed the target by 4 miles, but it was enough to send more radiation over to Eniwetok, and the shot was in Bikini. There are atolls. If you all know what an atoll is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And the residue was enough off of the missing the target to go over Eniwetok. And everybody wore what's called a RADSAF badge. And that measured radiation, and when you reached a certain level, you had to leave the area. And I think the limit was 3.6 Redkins. And a Redkin is the measurement of nuclear fission. So it was, there was quite a few people in Eniwetok Atoll that got too much radiation. They were okay, but they all had to go home. They couldn't be out there with more tests. A lot of our secondary duties were to fly to these various islands and resupply the weather station. The weather station was generally 2 weathermen, a tent, and there were 2 bunks and tent and weather equipment. And they had a radio that they could transmit the conditions to the headquarters in Eniwetok and Bikini. But we had to resupply these weathermen. They did their own cooking. They had their own little stove and everything, but they had to get food. And some of them were on islands with natives. And natives were either Micronesian from the islands, or stationed just above the equator, just northeast of Australia. So we're in a tropical climate. And like I say, our secondary duties were to go around these different islands and give the weathermen some supplies. Well, the first one we went into was a little island archipelago with a name of Kapini Marangi. And we landed our float plane, and in the nose of the plane, you could open the cockpit and had an anchor, put the anchor out, and they had a big door on the side, and we could, they had a little life raft, and we could plate that and take the supplies in. And the first time we went in, the chief, and these were Polynesians, they weren't Micronesians, so they were dark skinned, but very light. And they wore sarongs, both men and women, and the women were bare-breasted, and they were beautiful and off limits. Yeah, you didn't fool with the native women. But the first one we went to, the chief got the whole tribe out, and they lined them up on the jetty, and all these little kids are out there, and the women bare-breasted, and the men, and they had an interpreter that lived with the tribe that had been there since the German occupation back in, who knows when. He must have been 100 years old, but he spoke some broken English, and he was the interpreter. So we were the first crew to go in there, and the natives met us, and they were all excited about it, and we were too. He sent his young men up the coconut tree, and they got chopped down coconuts and chopped them off and gave us each a coconut we could drink, and the interpreter was there, and all these little kids were lined up, and there was a little blonde kid there. And these natives were all dark haired, and they were more tan skin, but they were the natives. And so somebody asked the interpreter, "What's the blonde kid? What's that all about?" And then they said it was a copra boat. So finally we found out that the copra boat was a Dutch ship that came around and picked up coconuts. And they would trade utensils to the natives and get coconuts and take them back for commercial use. But I got a kick out of that because they said that somebody in that coconut impregnated one of them natives. But they were very friendly people, and almost childlike.
Purebred. So much for purebred.
No purebred.
But that was one of our secondary duties, so we got different, the whole trust territories are, all the 1,000 islands, was a big island called Wochi. And it had been used by the Japanese in World War II, and it had been conquered by the Marine Corps. Marine Corps, I said.
Oh, chapter 5. Hoorah!
Is that your cue?
I missed my cue.
Well, their son-in-law was a Marine.
Once a Marine, always.
So where was I? Okay, yeah, I went to Wochi, and that was where the administration, the Trust Territories were under the United States. And they were responsible for all the activity in the Marshall Islands. And it was an island that had been occupied by the Japanese. In fact, there was 5 Japanese Zeros that were beached there that had been shot up by a Navy fighter pilot during World War II. And most of it was still there. Natives were scrounging parts off it to make pots and pans, but that was pretty interesting. And there was a building where we landed in the water and put the landing gear down, and there was a concrete ramp that went up into the on land. So you put the landing gear down in the water, and then we would taxi up and turn the upper around and get refueled. And they had some guy that had a goat, a native, and he helped with the refueling. Was this kind of thing, you know, the hand pump. And they had fuel there for us. And one time, the guy had a goat that lived that helped us. I mean, that was his job there to give fuel to us when we went into him. But he had a goat, and he kept him on that little platform. And there was one time when there was a woman. They had the Trust Territories had a staff there. There were women and men that governed the whole area. And they had a seaplane similar to this SA-16 that would come in and take them wherever they had to go around the Marshall Islands. And there was one of the women out there was waiting for that airplane one time. We were already up in the ramp getting refueled, but she was there waiting. And I know she had a big handbag that hung down, and she was looked like her in the 30s or late 30s. And the native refuelers had a goat and got up behind her and gave her a little nudge in the butt. And she took that person, turned around, and got ready to hit that goat. Or she didn't know what she thought was a man. She turned around and saw that goat, and up it went. But that's just some of the funny stuff that went on. But we had a lot of kick with the natives, and all the shots were. I guess I should emphasize that to me they were spectacular. I mean, when the Cherokee went off, we were doing the duck butt in case anybody had any problems. But we had goggles that were completely opaque. You couldn't see through. They were a really dark color that we had to put on. They had. I forgot to tell you this. Whenever they had a shot, they had microphone or speakers all over the base, and we had radios in the airplane, and they gave the countdown to when the shot was going to go. And we were all with our we put the goggles on. We had the countdown, and a minute before we put goggles on. I mean, plane was on autopilot, and when that thing went off, the light was so bright that it lit up the inside of the cockpit, and with opaque glasses, it just illuminated everything. And so So that reminds me that one time on Eniwetok, they'd use the small yields. An atoll is got a ring of islands around it. And I think the diameter at Eniwetok was about, maybe 20 miles or something like that. And the small yield shots, they would either put them in a tower or on a barge. But they had communications throughout all of the living areas and everything that when they would count it down, all the commanders had to have their people out under control. And when the countdown started down, the commander would have his troops kneel, or should kneel, and put their hand over their eyes and face away from the blast. And I remember one time I did that, and I opened my hand and looked, and I was looking at sand 180 degrees from the small yield shot, and the sand was glowing. That's how intense the brightness and the heat. So it was pretty scary. So.
Hey, Dad, why don't you show them the pictures?
I'll finish up here. There's one thing I did want to bring up, a close call. Later on, years later, I progressed in my Air Force. I went to pilot school and became a pilot. And I was a captain, and I got assigned to a launch crew for an Atlas missile. And it was an early model Atlas. It was a 3-stage missile that had it used to be classified, so I'm not going to say them. But it was a megaton warhead. So it had over 1 million pounds of equivalent TNT. And we were on alert like 24. We had 24-hour shifts, and the sites are 3 sites, A, B, and C, and each one was about 40 miles from Offutt Air Force Base. So when we went on shift, we'd take a bus out to the site, and I had a missile crew. There was 13 men in the crew. I was the launch officer, or guidance officer, and he was the launch officer. And we had a bunch of NCOs that did all the maintenance on the missiles. And it was a 24-hour shift, and we just had to stand by for World War III, and that was it. That's what we put a shift on. We didn't launch anything, but we ran through drills all the time.
Except you were there during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Well, yeah, I'm getting to that.
Okay.
During the Cuban Missile Crisis, we were on alert. And I don't know if you're aware of that, but the Soviets had put nuclear missiles on Cuba, and that was Khrushchev. And President Kennedy told Khrushchev that he didn't want those missiles on Cuba. And Khrushchev said, yeah, Bob, we'll leave them there anyhow. So it got pretty terse. And are you familiar with DEFCONs? Anybody? The Defense Condition System. Anyhow, I think normal was DEFCON. We never went DEFCON 5. That was nothing. You didn't do anything. But as the DEFCONs got lower, like 4, 3, 2, 1, 1 was war. And then 2 was the next condition, 3 and 4 and 5 was the least. But I think we were on a constant 4. When the Cuban Missile Crisis came about and Khrushchev didn't take his missiles out of Cuba, we got down to DEFCON 2. And with DEFCON 2, our missile was fueled with liquid oxygen and
Wow.
kerosene, ready to go. And everything was guidance was counted down. All we had to do was push a button. And there was 24 hours there where we were in DEFCON 2. And the launch officer and myself were at our consoles, and all our crew members had their own consoles. And I got very philosophic. And I got to think, if I push this damn button, I don't know how many thousand people are gonna die. And it became very, I was a professional soldier. I didn't get broke up about it, but it gave me reason to wonder about what's going on in the world. Of course, now we got, Iran wants to put their missiles up, and I think we're pretty close to World War III.
Well, you know.
So, we gotta watch it, and that's pretty scary. But anyhow, that's what I got on the missiles. They're pretty awesome. And I don't know if you can see this. These are pictures of Cherokee. When we weren't allowed to have cameras on the I can pass these around. We're not allowed to have cameras on Eniwetok because of classification. So I never had any pictures of that stuff. But the Atlas D became obsolete in 1966, and a friend back there, he got a later version of the Atlas. He was a missileer. Stand up.
Well, I do.
Okay, but you know what alert was, right? I don't remember where time, so.
Stan, I
If you have
have
any
a question.
questions,
Yeah, I have one. How long were you out in the Marshall Island area?
6 months.
Okay,
In fact, what happened, if you, in the Air Force or the military, if you had over 6 months and a day, it counted as an overseas tour. And this was a remote overseas tour, so that meant you only had to do one while your whole time was in the military. And so I never had to go overseas. Because I
Quote,
had an
unquote.
overseas tour in that. The only thing is Vietnam broke out, and I went over to Vietnam 6 times. So that was TDY. So the military gave it a different name, but you're still there. But there's 3 ways of doing things: the right way, the wrong way, and the military way. That's what that was all about.
so when you were in Vietnam with these 6 tours, how long did
I was a pilot then. I was in Strategic Air Command. And
Okay.
we
were you flying off of,
every day.
okay, where were you based when you were in Vietnam? In Vietnam?
Yes.
Okay.
No, but I was stationed in Thailand. Our base was in Thailand.
Okay,
And there was a fighter base in Thailand just north of us. But we would fly up into Vietnam. I was a tanker job. And they had B-52s. And, that's a different story.
What does that mean?
We haven't talked about
Refueling.
that, but
that's where you're connecting and refueling?
yeah. But we lost 33 B-52s going into Hanoi. And the reason why is I'll pass these around. These are the plane I flew to take them.
Yeah, wow,
But
wow.
the I forgot what I was going to say.
It's gorgeous music, no wonder.
Yeah.
None of it
Speaking
fits.
of Irish music.
No.
Stan,
Stan, why don't you tell the story about towing the other plane?
Huh?
Tell the story about towing
Towing.
planes.
Towing the plane?
Towing planes when they had problems in Vietnam. Using the boom to tow
That's a
planes.
different story. I don't want to go into all that. But
He's towing.
It's such an
refueled
interesting-
fighters
It's a good
and
story.
bombers. It was different mission each time,
There's a picture of it right here.
anyhow, oh yeah, I was talking about McNamara. And,
Is that connecting, fueling?
yeah, right. We could refuel fighters or bombers. We carried 300,000 pounds of fuel in the KC-135. So we could refuel, we could fly all day if we wanted to. And we could either use it or give it off.
Well, and the towing, I mean, I'll say this, so if a plane was in a Mayday situation and the
Well,
tankers
they could go
were
on.
nearby, they could go hook up a plane and haul it so that it could land.
Well, that's it. Let me get back, I'll get back to that. That was Vietnam. In one instance, we had an F-4, which is a fighter bomber, a fighter. And they would, we'd refuel them in a track in Vietnam, and they would go up into Hanoi. And, of course, they had a lot of battle damage. And, we had one F-4 come in, he hooked up, and the boom said, "Sir," he said, "the fuel's going out of his wings faster than we're giving it to him."
Wow.
And so I talked to the guy in the back, in the fighter, and he said, "Yeah, he was pretty well shot up." And I said, "Where's your base?" And he said, "It was in Thailand, in Tak Lee, and it was a fighter wing there. And he didn't have enough fuel to make it back. So the boom, if he flew good, and the boom, was a guy in the back of our airplane that had a control, and it was a boom that would extend out, and it had what they call rudder vaders on it, and you could steer that boom, and the airplane would come up behind it, get into a position, and the boom operator would shoot the boom down into in the hole where the fuel went. And so he got them hooked up and pumped fuel into it, but it was going out fast. So we were about what's called bingo fuel, which we were just about out. We were going back to the base. So we hauled him, towed him, and he did an excellent job of flying. All the way back to Tak Lee at 20,000 feet. And he had run out of fuel. I mean, the engines were dead, but we were towing him. And he said, "There's my base on 20,000 feet," and we were 20,000 feet. We released the boom, and he did a big circle, a dead stick landing, and he rolled out on the runway, and we were just getting out of radio range, and he said, "Hey, tanker," he says, "we made it, thanks to you." Things like that happened in Vietnam. It was a crazy place.
I apologize for all the noise in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah, I cut my stuff a little short, but I knew you were in there.
Well, do you think, Stan, you could come back again another time and
Yeah,
talk?
yeah.
Sounds good.
Is the other picture in there?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, okay.
Stand up.